All right, let's get into it. A lot of big story going around the country right now is the fraud in Minnesota. Mr. Auditor, what are your thoughts on that?
It's been really sad to see what's going on in Minnesota. I hate to say this in this way, but it's not surprising to me because really back in 2022, somewhere in there, we started to see signs that this Somali fraud was happening in Minnesota. There was a program, Feeding Our Future, which had been defrauded by hundreds of millions of dollars. And I started talking about it back then. There were a few federal indictments back then, and I actually testified before Congress in 2023 and mentioned to them that these kinds of programs really all across the country are super vulnerable to fraud, and really all that needs to happen is for a few people to get together and decide that they want to steal a whole bunch of money from the taxpayers. And so the federal government needs to do something about this. And of course, when I testified before Congress back then, the politicians in DC did absolutely nothing. I mean, you may remember, Blake, this was during the height of the Biden administration, when we would try to get meetings with the Biden HHS to talk about this kind of stuff that was going on. They wouldn't even take meetings to talk about it. It was just absolutely insane. And so now you fast forward, President Trump is in office. And I think when you have somebody like President Trump in office, you have somebody who doesn't care if they're being called names. They're just sick of what's happening to taxpayers, and they're willing to use their administration to shine a light on this kind of thing. And so now that the big spotlight gets put on Minnesota, we see exactly how bad it is, billions and billions of dollars of fraud. And so I'm grateful, I guess, now that we have a president who is going to use his administration to step up and do something. I hate that it happened. But we need to learn lessons from this. Around the country, everybody needs to learn the lesson that this can happen anywhere, and we got to be vigilant on behalf of taxpayers.
I know you do a lot of this work here in the state as well. Nothing, thankfully, as big as $9 billion.
That's right.
And I think it's going to grow the more and more that they dig into it. And we'll talk about later in the show where that money goes. Not only back home to Somalia and foreign terrorism, but also potentially Democratic candidates that run for office.
Yeah.
Do you think that there is anything on that scale, whether it's federal dollars or state dollars, that happens in the state, not only at like daycares, or it could be like gas stations or other businesses as well?
Yeah. Well, each individual program has its own weaknesses. And so you have to take each one by one. So if you look at example, daycares in Mississippi as compared to the daycare system in Minnesota, I mean, to be honest with you, when I read the stories in Minnesota, it's almost like no one cared if the daycares were lying about how many students they had and whether they were serving students well, any of that kind of stuff. Thankfully, in Mississippi, the audit process around our daycares is actually a good bit stronger than that. So you can actually go online right now and you can pull up a full list of every daycare in Mississippi that accepts public dollars, taxpayer dollars, and then you could see their most recent inspection. And the inspections look at everything from, the quality of the food that they're serving, all the way to how many kids do they say they can serve and how many kids are showing up. So you do have you have a much better process for checking these daycares in Mississippi than you did in Minnesota.
Yeah.
Now, does that mean that every program in Mississippi is great and has strong safeguards? Absolutely not. So an example in Mississippi that we found a few months ago is huge grants going from our Department of Health to nonprofits for absolutely no clear reason that benefited taxpayers. We saw grants going to nonprofits, and the nonprofits were then, you may have seen this audit from my office. One nonprofit was did a queer seniora. And so they're paying for a party. They're paying for Bud Light, literally Bud Light receipts with taxpayer dollars. So that's an example of the kind of thing that can happen in a different program, but here in Mississippi.
Yeah. I guess my question to you would be, what can the state legislature do, and and then federally, if you have any inclination there, what can they do to help prevent more stuff like this? Because that's what people want to know.
Yeah, I think that what you're seeing the Trump administration do now is what the federal government should have been doing for years. So HHS, federal agency, said just a few days ago that they were going to start requiring every single state to show more documentation before those states would be eligible to get any kind of child care subsidies. So receipts photographs of rolls of students, all of that kind of stuff. That's what the federal government should be doing and should have been doing for the last 5 years. What can the state do? Well, I think that the state made a big mistake. And when I say the state, I mean some of our politicians made a big mistake. A few years ago, my office found a massive amount of welfare money had been misspent. Some of it had been stolen. 7 people have pleaded guilty to state or federal charges in that case. And really, the biggest response from our politicians in Jackson was to just increase the amount of welfare money that goes out per check to people who are on welfare.
Yeah.
That seemed to me to be the wrong answer to that. If you'd made me king for a day, I would not have done that. What I would have done is said, all right, we need to overhaul these programs. We need to stop paying people for not working. It hurts our economy. It hurts our labor force participation. What we need to do is instead, if we're going to get this money from the federal government, we should really only be giving it to people if they're going to show up and work at a job.
Yeah.
That's really the common sense answer. So that's the kind of stuff that I think the state needs to be doing now.
Absolutely. Hopefully we get some of that crackdown here in the session that starts in, guess what, Tuesday, they swear?
Right.
Yeah, I'll be at the Capitol on Tuesday for Don Hartness over there. So that'll be awesome. I think that is very true. It's amazing to me that people just want to keep doing this handouts and stuff.
Yep.
Because the more and more that you print that money, the more and more inflation goes up, but people are not working. So people aren't stimulating the economy.
Well, you understand the economy better than most 30s and 40-year-olds because folks just sort of look at the prices at the grocery store and they're like, gosh, how did this happen? Well, it's because we've been printing money.
Yeah.
Ad nauseum for the last 5-10 years. And our federal government spends too much money.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons we spend so much money is that a big chunk of it gets taken by fraud, waste, and abuse. And so I was actually in DC. This was maybe 5-6 months ago. And I got to hear the deputy chief of staff for the president, James Blair, speak. And he was saying, we think that our crackdown on fraud, waste, and abuse in the federal government, especially in these big entitlement programs, will potentially save $1 trillion a year. And if you do that, I mean, that's how you crack down on not just fraud, waste, and abuse, but also the inflation that we see happening in our economy and our debt. Absolutely.
And I think that's what I think the goal of Doge was to get like $2 trillion or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but that's, we spend 5 and we take in 5, we spend 7 every year.
Yeah.
That's what the federal government's doing right now. Anyone that can do basic addition knows that's not going to Doesn't work. So if you get $1 trillion in entitlement programs and then the combination of tariffs, the gold card, and then even more that you find, you really start making stuff happen and making progress on that debt.
I think so too. And you pointed it out. Doge was the first piece in cracking down on that debt. But the other really big important piece that the president has is the One Big Beautiful Bill.
Mm-hmm.
So those two things together are very critical to cracking down on the debt because the One Big Beautiful Bill, that's the thing that has the big fraud prevention mechanisms in it for these big entitlement programs. You have to have both.
Absolutely. And that I think it mandated, I remember Stephen Miller talking about this whenever it was a big controversy, is it mandates $2 trillion in savings over the next 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it's not enough, but it's a start.
It's more than any administration in my lifetime has done.
Absolutely. Right? Certainly in mine. So I think it'll be great. And that's what people have been talking about. Like, well, Thomas Massey didn't vote for this bill because this is the same funding that goes. No, this is the bill that cuts out the fraud.
That's right.
Because the bill won't take effect until this year, 2025 and before. It's a bill had nothing to do with that.
That's right. And also, for those folks who didn't vote for this bill, my Lord, when was the last time you saw a perfect piece of legislation?
Never.
It's never happened because we're humans. There's only been one perfect person to walk on this earth, right?
Absolutely.
So you have to figure out, all right, is this legislation on net good for the taxpayers? And obviously the One Big Beautiful Bill was very critical.
Yeah.
And so I'm glad it passed. I hate that we had to fight some Republicans to get it done.
Yeah,
but
I mean, it is what it is, but we will certainly see as closer and closer that we get to the midterms, it'll start to take effect. We've already seen interest rates get dropped, and then they get the corporate tax cut as well, which they don't put that in their pocket. Anyone that takes high school economics know that they will put that back into the market because their competitors are going to put it into the market. That's the whole point of it. Supply side economic works. We see that every single day. And did you watch any of Mondami's speech yesterday in New York?
I stomached through some Twitter clips. I did not sit down and watch the whole thing. It was
pretty bad. He said that I was elected as a democratic socialist and I will govern like a democratic socialist.
credit to him for being honest,
Yeah.
right? You know,
Yeah.
like, you see a lot of Democrats who just lie and pretend to be centrists, and this guy is being honest.
Yeah, I
about
will
how
credit him
crazy
for
it is.
that, and he knows how to run a campaign, at least on social media.
Yep.
But God bless that city for what they're about to endure. So
It's really sad. It's been a while since I've been to New York for a visit. I don't plan on going back anytime soon, but it's sad because it's a huge American city. I think the president has even said, this is a city that needs to be great.
yeah.
And it's not going to be under Mamdani.
How often do you see Democrat politicians talk about how the whole country needs to be great? And
Yeah,
not
exactly.
just the specific parts that they govern.
What they say is, oh, we're not a great country,
Yeah.
and like, if you don't think we're a great country, then there are other places to go.
Absolutely.
there are plane tickets. There are
You can
folks
get paid $1,000 by ICE to go back to your home
That's
country.
right. That's exactly right. What worried me about the Mamdani speech, one of the clips that I saw was, he said the age of rugged individualism is over.
Yeah.
And we're embracing collectivism. And just breaking apart the last part of that sentence. Like, I don't think that folks realize collectivism and collectivist governments have collectively been responsible for millions and millions of deaths.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think it was like some sort of paradise to go live in Cambodia under Pol Pot or go live in Soviet Russia, like, you are out of your mind if you think that was fun. Like, you need to go back and study history. Go back and and if you don't want to read, there are movies out there like the movie Chernobyl. I don't know if you've seen that, but I mean, you talk about how horrible life was in the Soviet Union, the amount of disinformation, the people thrown in gulags just for disagreeing with the government, folks murdered just for disagreeing with the government. Like, that is what the word collectivism actually means when you put it into practice in government. And Mamdani's saying that's what he wants. It's bad. It's very, very bad.
Well, that wraps us up. We're on our first break now, so we'll head to it. But that is the truth. You're listening to Blake Bartlam and State Auditor Shad White on the Andrew Gosser Show. We will be right back. All right, we are back on 103.9 WYAB out of Florida, Mississippi. One thing I didn't say earlier, because I was focused on getting our guests shouted out, go follow Andrew on X at Andrew Gosser, AndrewGasser. He has got me in the spot where I can have the state auditor on the show. First time I've ever solo hosting it. So last segment, we were talking about Minnesota and the fraud there. And Mr. Auditor, you obviously are very, very well versed in fraud. You've uncovered millions, tens of millions of dollars here in the state, and we're thankful for that. Moving on from that, session starts. We talked about it in 2-3 days or whatever.
Yep.
What are you looking for out of this session?
Well, there are two things. The first is a set of bills that I'm going to be pushing for personally. And those are bills that do things like putting a fee on remittances. So those are payments going from Mississippi to foreign countries, and then using that money to create an illegal immigration task force, very similar to something Oklahoma has done. It's also very similar to something in the One Big Beautiful Bill that the president has put into place. I also think that, we need to make illegal immigration a state crime so that we can have our state and local law enforcement fully participate with ICE and helping to crack down on that. That'll be one big set of ideas. And it's important because, by our estimation in the auditor's office, illegal immigration costs taxpayers about $100 million a year.
Wow.
So we have to crack down on waste, and this is a big way of doing it. We're gonna offer a bill that would cut fat out of state government, so cutting down on the number of cars in state government, cutting down on the amount of office space that government leases, which we do not need. So there's that kind of stuff. And then bigger picture, I think the legislature itself is going to have a huge debate over education and school choice this time. And so I think that's going to suck up a lot of energy and oxygen. And
education, that's the one thing that I've been really happy to see you talking about the most, that I really don't see another politician in the state talking about. I have a unique experience of having all three: private school, homeschool, and public school.
Oh, interesting.
I went to JA until I was about halfway through 8th grade. And then I was homeschooled for the rest of that year. And then I've been at Northwest Rankin High School, in high school. And I've gotten to see all three. And I will tell you that JA was very good in the early years because they focused on reading, writing, and arithmetic. It's very simple, got a good foundation. But then when I went to public school, and JA is a campus that is extremely small. And it's tucked in there in Sheffield Drive and Ridgewood. and they got Hanging Moss Creek right in the back of it. So they're not like growing.
Yep.
They can't grow the campus unless they like blow down a neighborhood.
Yep.
And I don't think they're going to do that.
Mhm.
But they got so much done on that small campus, and with limited teachers, limited resources. I mean, they charge arm and a leg for tuition. I'll say that.
Yep.
But they got a lot more done with less. And when I went to Northwest Rankin, they had just built that new high school. It's huge.
Yep.
And they're still using the old middle school as the 9th grade building.
Mhm.
So you've got a huge campus that I don't know what the square footage or whatever is, but there's still so many problems.
Yeah.
And then when I walk around and like admins driving around in their brand new 2025 GMC 2500s, that's
Yep.
great. Okay, if you can afford that. But why is admin? And admin grows every year.
Yep.
They've added another administrator every single year I've been there, and
Yep.
I've only been there for 4 years. And y'all point out the funding is like, why is all this money going to admin whenever teachers are still making this
Yep.
little money?
Yep. It's a huge problem. We as a state spend more money on administration as a percentage of our K-12 budget than any other state in the South, which is a huge issue. And anytime you say that out loud, you have these education advocates and some administrators who will say, well, you're just attacking public education. No, I want public education to do well. I'm a product of our public schools. My mom was a public school teacher for 35 years. 2 of my 4 grandparents were public school teachers in rural Jones County. We've just got to get money going to teachers in the classroom. It makes no sense that we, once again, have the lowest paid teachers in the entire country. Teachers in some places still have to go out of pocket to buy their own classroom supplies. That's where the money needs to be going. And in any business, the business would say, well, that's where we make our money right there. That's where we should be putting our dollars. They would allocate dollars there. But in government, you have to have a forcing mechanism.
Yeah.
You have to have somebody to come in and make that argument that the bureaucrats need to change the way these dollars are flowing.
Yeah. And it's been really weird to me, because I mean, the education numbers have improved in the last few years or whatever, but I can just imagine how much better would it be if we dumped that money into teachers instead of the admin, just in general. Because I mean, I look at them like my teachers, like I have my calculus teacher, she'll be on maternity leave this next 9 weeks. It's like, and she would be able to do a lot more in the classroom, even though she was pregnant. If she just had a little bit more money, she wouldn't be stressed about getting to work and daycare and all that stuff.
Absolutely.
It would just help these teachers out that are raising the next generation.
Oh, yeah.
And if you want them to raise them the right way, allow them to do their job and make sure they have enough money in their pocket where they're not overwhelmed by the stress of life.
Or you would have a second calculus teacher. I mean, if you raise pay, you're going to get more people who are talented, who are interested in teaching. And so you get more more resources going into the classroom. That's where it really matters. And look, I've proposed a really simple fix. It's something that Texas has debated. If we don't do this in the next few years, I bet you some other red states are going to do it and we'll be left behind. We should be spending at least 50% of every education dollar on teacher salaries. Right now, it's at like 42, 43%. So we're not talking about a massive change, but this would be a huge, good first step.
Yeah.
And if you boost teacher pay in that way, you're talking about another $7,000-8,000 over what they get right now. They actually would become pretty competitive compared to our sister states around us. So that's what we ought to be doing. It's just common sense. But I don't think you'll get a ton of lawmakers who are willing to talk about this until somebody steps up, has some courage, and proves that you can win elections on messages like that, and then everybody will come along for the ride after that.
I'm really glad you say that, and how Mississippi needs to start getting their act together and start being a leader. I'm tired of the politicians, both at the federal and state level, that act like this state has always just sat in the back and has just listened to orders. Mississippi's a state that's never backed down from a fight. I mean, just look at the state's history. I mean, obviously the Civil War, but like just Katrina, Camille, all these storms and all the stuff that, Mississippi doesn't produce anybody. And then you look at the athletes and the authors and the history of the state. It's just rich. This is not a state that backs down. It's a state that leads.
That's right.
And I wish our leaders would embody that.
We need politicians who reflect that. That's exactly right. And to be honest with you, I think if we had elected officials with a little bit more courage, it would be easier to change some things in Mississippi than it is to change in Florida or Texas. Like if you want to, I mean, we for a while had supermajorities, Republican supermajorities in both the House and the Senate. We could have put into place a lot of these things that Florida had to fight years for. We could have done that long ago. But we choose to, a lot of our elected officials choose to kind of sit back. They don't like to be criticized. They don't want mean things said about them on Facebook or by some liberal journalist. And what you have to realize is that those folks who are saying those mean things, they're not going to like you anyway. You may as well just do
Yeah,
what you think is right.
exactly.
Stand up, say it out loud, defend it, and then go get it done.
Yeah.
And I think that Mississippi can really become a leader on a bunch of really important issues in the next 5 years if we have folks who don't care about criticism, but do care about normal working taxpayers.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just like Senator John Kennedy from Louisiana would always say is, why are we giving all these money to foreign countries that hate us? They can hate us for free.
That's right. They're going to hate you anyway.
Exactly. Yeah. And I don't know why in the world we would ever back down to, especially like in a state where we have super majorities. I paged for Brent Powell one week in my 10th grade year of high school. Mm-hmm. And we sat there for, I kid you not, 2 hours arguing over, I want to say it was like a few $1,000s of utility bills getting covered by the state in some county in northeast Mississippi. Sat there for 2 hours arguing over that.
Yeah.
And it wasn't even representatives from that area that were arguing. It was all Democrats from Jackson.
Yeah.
And we spent 2 hours arguing over that.
Yep.
That was a few $1,000s.
Yep.
Over like an electric bill.
Yep.
Really? That's what we're spending our time on whenever we could have been doing school choice, tax cuts, like
cutting down on Medicaid fraud,
Yeah, exactly.
They'll argue over a few $1,000s here and there. And my audit teams have found that consistently in Medicaid, there's anywhere between $60 and $140 million a year going out the door to people who don't seem to be eligible to be on the program. So you want to argue about a few $1,000s, or do you want to do the difficult thing and actually crack down on Medicaid fraud? The reason they don't touch Medicaid fraud is the same reason they don't touch other hard problems. As soon as you do it, the newspapers will write about you. Oh, you hate poor people. Mm-hmm. Well, no, don't worry about what the newspaper reporters are saying. Focus on what the right thing to do is. And if you do that, you can save a ton of money. You can use that money for tax cuts, roads and bridges, teacher salaries, cop salaries, the stuff that actually matters.
Imagine a Delta infrastructure bill that the state passes. Like just what that would do to the state.
Yeah.
You revitalize the Delta, you bring the state back.
Yep.
And you bring Jackson back, to be honest, because Jackson's the key to the Delta.
Yep.
You got 55 and 20 right there.
That's right.
And 49. So
Really
hope that we can get that done. State Auditor, thank you for coming on.
Thanks for
having
me. It's
been a blast.
Yeah,
so y'all listen to 103.9 WYAB. We will be right back.